Resume recording.
Okay, whoops, just had to accept that. Okay. Sure. Well, let's get started. As I said, very excited to see you all. Thank you for being here. When looking at the list of attendees, I saw we have a wonderful mix of alums, of retired faculty, of current parents, parents of alums, some grandparents. I think we have some prospective families and friends of the school, and probably some other categories that I'm forgetting, but we're really excited to have you here. My name is Sarah Ye. I am the Associate Head for Teaching, Learning, and Faculty at CA, which basically means I do a lot of the Dean of Faculty type roles and working with our amazing teachers and kind of overseeing the academic side of the house, where we talk about all things curriculum and pedagogy that you're going to be hearing about tonight. This is my 16th year at the school, and I am also the current parent of a 12th and a 9th grader, which has been wonderful. And they're both going through the very busy things that come with December here at CA, which has been lots of fun. But we're so delighted that you're going to join us for what is one of my favorite topics and one of the things that I love most about my work, which is talking and working with our incredible faculty as they develop courses and talk about how we go about building our incredible curriculum and program catalog. And as I imagine many of you have either seen or experienced, CA on any given year is offering over 200 courses. And we often hear like, how do you do that? And what goes into that? And how do you figure that out? And there are a lot of things. I would say some of the key framing questions that we're always thinking about are, thinking about skills. What are the skills that we think our students are going to need as we think about the fields that they're going into? What's going to best serve them as they go on to their next steps after CA? We talk about, how can our curriculum work to advance the mission? So centering, love of learning, equity, common trust. What are the ways that we're honoring each individual while also centering creativity and collaboration and justice and sustainability, all of those pillars of the mission that we care so deeply about. We spend some time talking and doing professional development around how can we address the needs of all learners within our school community when we're designing and implementing the curriculum. We talk about the world outside of CA. So how can we integrate kind of real world applications and experiential learning opportunities to make sure that the learning is feeling relevant and applicable to our students in their daily lives. And we take a look at, what steps do we as educators need to take to ensure that our curriculum is promoting inclusivity and is really embracing our students' perspectives and cultures and histories as we design. So those are some of the many things that go into the conversations that are going on throughout the year, whether that's in faculty meetings or department head meetings or within departments in their department meetings. And we wanted to give you a little insight tonight into how that process of course development happens and the various ways faculty approach course design. It's always one of my favorite times of the year when Rob Monroe, who's our assistant head for academics and equity, he and I work with department heads, and we meet with each department head and we hear the ideas that their department members have surfaced around courses. And then we all work together to make sure there's a kind of a balance of offerings, looking at the number of courses and number of sections. But kind of throughout that process, it is just a beautiful thing to hear teachers just bursting with energy about a kind of a new offering they're excited to teach, as well as ways they've been thinking about, adapting or evolving something that maybe is a standard course they've taught many times before. So we're tonight have some people who are going to talk to you about that process on a variety of levels. It might be about how they design their courses. It might be about how they choose the text that they use in their courses, but they are the real feature for the evening. So I'm going to turn it over to them. They're going to each talk for a little bit about some aspect of their course design, and then we're going to aim to leave a few minutes at the end for your questions before we wrap up. And I think to make sure we get to hear from everyone, we're going to ask you to hold your questions until after everyone has spoken, and then we'll kind of ask questions of the group. So if that all sounds good, I'm gonna, I think, turn it over to our first faculty speaker tonight, which is Nick Hebert from our English department.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be with you all. I am Nick Hebert from the English department. And I thought I would say a little bit this evening about how I get into initial planning, about new courses I'm thinking about. And really, when thinking about this, I realize I'm kind of like always in the initial planning, which is like, I like to think about courses all the time, even courses that I've taught before. When I teach them again, they feel like new classes to me. And I think I'm constantly thinking about how to make things new and how to make things fresh. If it's helpful for context, at the upper level, I teach in a kind of rotation 4 different electives for our juniors and seniors. I'm currently teaching one right now called Ghosts in American Literature, which looks at how American writers use the supernatural to interrogate questions of belonging in the country. In the spring, I'll teach a class about home and global literature. And then in alternating years, I teach a class on Henry David Thoreau and writers that are in conversation with him, and then a class on memoir. And I'll say a little bit more about the memoir class in just a couple of minutes, just by way of example. I think the clearest way I can kind of explain the process when I'm getting into some initial thinking about a class is that I really kind of am orbiting 3 sort of central questions or ideas. And so I thought it might be useful just to share about those. The first is a line that my dad is really fond of. I grew up in a teacher family, and so pretty much everyone I'm related to is a teacher, and so conversation at home is often about teaching and school. And my dad is really fond of this line from this theologian he really loves named Howard Thurman, who has this line where he says, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And so the thing that is really helpful to me as a kind of exhortation from that line is that last phrasing of like, come alive. And so when I'm thinking about new classes, I think at some level, I'm thinking almost in a kind of selfish way about what's making me come alive. Because that's centrally, I think, what I want to bring into the room is like a genuine and authentic love for a question or a series of questions. Or concerns or things I'm kind of wondering about. And so always operating for me is that question of like, what's making me come alive? Like, what do I love? What's bringing me joy in a genuine way? And oftentimes for me, that's questions. So I'm trying to think a lot about that. The second thing that comes in is I think a lot about this convocation talk that Laura Twitchell gave a few years ago at the opening of the CA school year. And as she was thinking through in much more beautiful language, how she thinks about animating a school year, she was thinking about like verbs that help her to operationalize how she gets into the mode of like learning in community with people. And the words that she used were, she's thinking about like, what do I want to honor? What do I want to unlearn? And how do I want to grow? And so those questions to me are sort of often in mind. But what really helps me sort of move to the next level of planning is to think about this conversation that I had with Laura about her talk. And she said, like more recently, oh, I think if I gave it again, another thing that I would operationalize my thinking about learning would involve the word gather. And so this one question I've got from Laura is like, what's a good thing for us to gather in community and work on together? And so that's another thing that comes into my initial planning for a class. What's making me come alive, and what's making me come alive in a kind of gathering with other people? What are some questions that I want to work on? Writers I really admire, Fred Moten and Ross Gay, often refer to their students as people they are studying with. And so one of the things I'm also thinking about too is like, what can make this group of people I'm studying with come alive? What are some really essential questions we should be thinking about? And ultimately, when I start to think about those questions, I'm able to start to think about some texts that might be helpful to animate that work. And then I'm starting to think about what are some texts that can help us belong to that conversation, that are going to make us feel like we belong to one another in the work of that conversation. And what are texts that are going to get us to stretch a little bit outside of ourselves, but also give us some mirrors as a way to see ourselves a little bit more clearly. Last thing I'll say is that the last thing I think about is an essay by Goldie Mohammed, who's an education professor I really admire. And she wrote this really rad essay called 12 Questions to Ask When Designing Culturally and Historically Responsive Curriculum. And 3 of the questions from that article really helped me to think about like what texts are going to come into that class. One question she asks is, of all the things in the world, why are you teaching this now? Which I think is really helpful in centering me in terms of like, what are important questions for us to be in conversation about? Another question she asks is, how will your instruction help students learn something about themselves, including their racial and cultural identities, and about others? And then the third question she asks is, how will you change as a result of the teaching? And that to me is a really central question too. I think if I'm going to be really authentic to making something that's going to come alive for us, like there needs to be something at stake for me too in the work of that learning community. And so I'm trying to think about how I'm going to change as part of that work too. So that's really what takes me into a class. I worry that's a little bit too theoretical, but those are the questions that tend to animate things for me. And most recently, those came alive for me in this class about memoir last spring, where we looked at this sequence of texts by American writers who are thinking about not only what stories they're sharing about themselves, but how they're telling those stories. And for me, that really gathered things together. I think that's all. I worry I've run on too long already.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Nick. I think next we're going to turn things over to George Larrabee from the math department.
Oh, hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Oh, good. Okay. Well, first of all, I would just want to say a shout out to Miss Gray, who is here this evening and who brought me into CA back in the last century. And it's great to see you here. It's great to see everybody else here too. So anyways, math, we've got a program that's very big and it's evolving all the time. We in the math department are thinking about new courses all the time. We're involved. I'm teaching a new one this semester. I wrote one two years ago. We're currently writing a series of 4 new courses that are going to be coming in. One that is starting this semester. And so we're thinking about it all the time. But before I tell you a little about how I go about and how we go about thinking about new courses, I thought I'd just give you a little bit of update on the evolution of math in high school. Years ago, when I was, back in the last century, when I was in high school, all roads led to calculus. Everything was about calculus, and that worked great for me because I was going to be a math major. But it's not ideal for everybody. And it took us a little while to figure that out. And so eventually statistics courses started coming because said, that's very important too. There are a lot of disciplines that use statistical tools and thinking. And so we say, why don't we introduce those? And so statistics has been a big part of CA, certainly since I started, and now everybody goes through statistics. All the students who go through CA, they learn statistics at some point. And then we opened it up a little bit more to other types of electives. And so we've got, originally, when I started, we had 2 electives, which were the advanced topics courses. Actually, there was another one called Applied Math years ago. And over the years, we've added more and more electives, largely, well, at the higher levels. So we had, we've got the advanced topics courses. We've got, the like linear algebra is being taught this semester. We've got set theory next semester, topology last semester. And that's terrific for the students like me who are going to go on in STEM and and they just want a lot of knowledge, and it's great. But it doesn't serve everybody. There are a lot of students who are not going to go on to math. It's not their primary focus. It's not where they get their joy. It's like it's an interesting place to be, and or maybe it's a requirement that they just have to satisfy. And so we said, well, that's a shame. What can we do for those students? Can we make our math program more inclusive? And so we started thinking about electives for more general, more for everybody. So we came up, with the math of social justice not too long ago, and that's a course that anybody can take that one. The students who are going off to become engineers or physicists, and the students who aren't, students who are going to go off, become whatever, let's say an artist or something like that. They'd be all great for that course. And it's a really interesting course, makes a lot of use of statistics, and of course is very, very relevant. And so they really appreciate that. And then we have like the new course 2 years ago, discrete math, which is that's another one that's accessible by everybody. Students who have just barely made it over the math requirement, and students who have already completed a couple of semesters of calculus, they can all be there at the same time. These are topics that they've never learned before, and they're less dependent on, let's say, the algebra that came before, or the trigonometry or the pre-calculus before. It's appropriate for everybody, and it's got a whole bunch of new topics for them that are very, very applied. And so we're thinking about the set of four. They're called integrated math. Those are new classes, and those are we're thinking very hard about the applications that those courses will bring in. And that's where I want to get to is like, well, what are we thinking about when we are designing new courses? Well, the first thing we want to think about, of course, is what do we want the students to get out of the class? What sort of skills do we want? We're thinking very broadly about skills too, not just these math tools, but these broader skills that they'll need. Let's say the reasoning skills, the ability to analyze, the ability to look at somebody else's argument and say, is that does that ring true? Is there let's say something wrong in the reasoning? Let's say and to help them, let's say, with their ability to communicate what they've just figured out. That's a very, very important skill. And it's not something that really got a lot of focus previously. It was just sort of something that you'd pick up somewhere along the line, and hopefully you'll get it. But it's like, no, we're thinking more about that. Is that that's going to get a bigger focus in our courses. Something else we want to do when we write a new course is we want to develop a level of excitement. Do we want, because too often, students have left the math program with that was great, thanks, but no more. Never again. I'm out of here. It's like, that's a real shame. We don't want that to be the way students leave Concord Academy. We want them to leave with a sense of, wow, that was really interesting. I'd like to learn more. That's what we're aiming for. So can we generate that excitement? And we try to do that by bringing in applications. So I think when people see that the math is connected to other things, they feel its relevance. Like for instance, I was teaching a statistics class last week, and it just happened to be that the first example was on the Quabbin Reservoir. I said, I don't know if the students know much about that. So I went and I looked up, a map of the Quabbin Reservoir, got that ready, showed it to them. Where is it? Then I showed them a little video that only lasted about 2 minutes on the history of the Quabbin Reservoir and about the towns that had to be that were basically flooded to make it. And I think that really brought it alive for them. And also, I think we want to, when we're designing new courses, find the connections that make it seem richer, that you say, oh yeah, this thing is connected to that. If you look at it this way, this thing is really like this thing. And it puts it all together, ties it all together. And I think that helps generate a sense of, certainly, if not a sense of excitement, certainly an appreciation, a sense of wonder. We're also looking at very closely about the types of activities. What types of activities are appropriate for what levels? What sorts of what sort of format can we use that makes the most sense? And then we're also thinking about projects. Historically, projects in math have taken a very small role, but now we're looking for a bigger role because that allows students choice. And when you give them choice, they're likely to have a better experience. And so projects are taking a bigger role in the classes. Anyways, the thing I just want to leave you with is that now we're thinking less about teaching math as from a focus of, as purveyors of knowledge, and more focusing on the students. How can we help the students grow from this experience and want to keep growing? Okay.
Great. Thank you, George. That was wonderful insight into how intentionally kind of the math department has really been thinking about how to serve all students and evolve the curriculum. So thank you. Okay, I think next we're going to hear from Kim Frederick in the history department.
Hi, thanks everyone for being here. I think I'm going to talk, I think people have talked, Nick and George talked sort of theoretically about ways that they think about courses and develop courses. And I think I'm going to get sort of mucky specific just to be slightly different. So I want to talk particularly about a series of public history classes that I have been developing over a series of years. So there's public history, and then there are like lots of different ways of doing public history. And we are incredibly blessed here in Concord to have amazing historical cultural institutions like the Concord Museum and the National Park and the Robbins House, and the trustees of reservations have some things in town, and then there are private historical organizations like Orchard House, and just a really amazing, wonderful community of historians and historically oriented thinkers. And so I would say some of the first experiments in doing public history I did in Department X's with teachers in other departments. So one of the first ones was a class called the Boston class that was the history and environmental science of Boston. And the final project for that course, which was 2 classes for the students, was for them to build a walking tour of Boston. The students chose to do the history of land and land development, which does not sound particularly exciting, but it is, I promise, really interesting. I think you can still access that tour on Spotify or Apple Music. And the next experiment was at the Robbins House, which is Concord's African American History House, with Justin Bull, and we worked on trying to. I don't know if anyone's ever been there. It's a very tiny space, and because it's a tiny space, it cannot be furnished. So it's a house museum, but it can't have furniture in it because the furniture would take up too much space. And so it's hard to get a sense of like, what would this look like if people lived here? And so what Justin and I were trying to do was to use augmented reality to sort of show through using a screen, like what would it look like if you had chairs and table here, you had beds here, you were trying to have your 5 children sleep here, what would that look like? And while we were not super successful on the augmented reality front, I think the projects that kids did and worked on really helped them understand the history, and also helped me understand more about how to do public history work. Since then, I've done projects with the Concord Museum. So there was a class that I taught that was called Object Permanence, where students were looking at the history of objects and the way that historians use objects to tell stories about the past. And that final project for that was students gave what's called a gallery talk, which is kind of like a thing that you do in museums. So you go in and someone walks you through the gallery, and they were able to pick items out of Concord Museum's collections that were not on display, and use those to create their own original gallery talks. And then I did a project, and this actually was in conjunction with Ben Stumpf, who teaches computer science. In the fall, my students worked on tours of the land of Concord Academy, the history of the land of Concord Academy. And in the spring, his students turned those into augmented reality tours of campus. which you can access through an app called Hoverlay. So if you're on campus and you get the app Hoverlay, it will see the tours. I think they're turned on right now. This spring, I'll be working with the Concord Museum and the town of Concord, which certifies tour guides, and with the Robbins House and with Orchard House to train students to be tour guides. So when they finish the class this spring, they will be certified Concord tour guides, eligible for paying jobs in town, touring visitors who come. And they will write some original 20th century tours. So the town of Concord is actually pretty interested in starting to look at its 20th century history, because the focus has been most on the 18th and 19th century history of town. And so they're excited to have young people look at the history of the 20th century and see what kinds of stories they can bring to light. They're also really excited because I think they said their average age of tour guide is like 64 or something like that. And so they're really excited about the prospect of having some 18 and 19-year-old tour guides to lead tours in town. So I think when I think about, in terms of thinking about like how to leverage access to these public historical resources, I think about both sort of what those institutions need and what we can do to benefit them. So for the Robbins House, it was actually pretty good exercise for the Robbins. I'm also on the board of the Robbins House, so full disclosure. But it was a great exercise to think about sort of like, what are we doing to help visitors understand the experience of living in this house and growing up in this house. And I think, you know, so like for the public history class, the students, the first project is working with the Concord Museum to write interpretive tags. They have a new exhibit that's going to open on March 22nd, and our students are going to have the opportunity to work with them. What they're going to do is they're going to work up 3 different interpretations of the same object, and to sort of have a vision of kind of like, what are the different ways you can tell this story. And so we're working really closely with them so that the work that our students do actually is helpful to them in the work that they're doing to mount the exhibit. So kids get like really hands-on, real life sense of what does it mean to be a public historian? How do you think about and prepare stories about our past for visitors to our town? And it comes with a whole host of considerations about who your audience is and what the stories that we expect to hear are, and what the stories that we have to tell that are exciting and new, that can help visitors have an experience they never expected, but in a delightful sort of way. So yeah, so that's kind of like, I guess, nitty gritty on that particular path. I teach other courses, but that's one that I guess I do kind of every other year, and every time I do it, the iteration is new. So there you go.
Great, thank you, Kim. It probably won't surprise you all to hear that Kim is an inspiration to educators around town, and recognized in that way for really kind of helping people and encouraging teachers to make use of the amazing resources in our town, and has forged some wonderful partnerships between CA and the town of Concord. So thank you for sharing about that. And last up on the list, finally, we're going to hear from Will Tucker in the science department.
Thank you, Sarah. And hello, everybody. My name is Will Tucker, he, him, his pronouns, chair of the science department, and I also teach chemistry specifically. And so I'm going to continue Kim's kind of rarefaction. We're going to keep going down, in this case, all the way to the point of looking at a singular book, which I'm going to share with you now, the link to this. So this is actually something that started out as a bit of a passion project and then spun wildly out of control. So that is, over the past, it's been a while, but in intensive format over the past year, I've been working on putting together my own advanced chemistry textbook. So what would be a general chemistry book for either advanced high school chemistry or intro college chemistry. And this actually, it didn't start out where I sat there and went, ooh, I want to write a book. That came later. It actually started out with CA's wonderful and lovely and inquisitive students. So actually, I would say the kind of point of this book was over Stacks on Zoom. There was a question from a former student who was asking about this topic we do with what makes a gas real. And so for those of you who are more STEM oriented, we tend to assume gases are ideal. That is, they have no volume and they don't interact with each other, the particles that make up a gas. And then you can go, okay, well, what makes a gas real? If those two things aren't true, if those assumptions no longer hold. And one of the ways you can model that is this equation called the van der Waals equation, which has these two correction factors. And this student said, okay, but those random units for that A term, they just seem really random. What do those mean? And I had to admit in the moment, I honestly have the faintest idea. I know they cancel out, so we get the right final unit, but I don't know why they are what they are. And so that sparks this whole inquiry to try to figure out why those units. What does that set of units mean? And digging into it more, talking with former mentors and trying to dig into the original research, I found that it actually is a really awesome way, if you can pull it apart a little bit, to dive into this topic. So it actually is something that allows us to quantify intermolecular forces, the thing that hold particles together, the stabilizing energy that on the atomic scale is what makes everything sticky. So we tend to think of like, oh, that's not sticky, that's slippery. But at the atomic scale, everything sticks to each other. And why is that the case? This A value with these really kind of bizarre units allowed us to actually quantify and model this in a way that took something that was nebulous and bring it down to a more tangible and tactile and tractable expression. And so that then led me to kind of create, I'll create this handout. And it kind of was essentially a chapter in a nebulous form, but a chapter nonetheless. And that then became a handout I was using for several years. And then at the same time, there were other things that came up where it's like, oh, I don't like how the book I'm using works on this. So I'll put together some handouts. And so handouts started accumulating in various places. But then this past, not the summer that just happened, the summer before, so summer 2022, I went to the Biennial Conference on Chemistry Education. And it was an amazing chance for some professional development, but there were some really key talks that came from that. One was this talk by this woman at Northwestern University, talking about the history of chemistry, which is a personal interest of mine. And her whole talk was about the homogeneous history of chemistry. That is, if you look, chemistry has a fixation on names. That is, we love to name the people that did that. Though I will fully put out there and credit the fact that we don't name everybody. We name the lead person, and we ignore the army of people that usually helped lead to this point. But we have a fixation on naming these people. We encourage that, and we actually say, oh, this is the Hammond postulate, or this is the Walden inversion. And if you actually go through and look at all those names, look at the people that we honor with their names being in history and chemistry, they are, with very, very limited exception, male, white, cisgendered, so far as we know, straight, and either European or American. There's almost no other regions of the world represented. And one of the things this person highlighted was, we tend to want to hide this history because it's embarrassing to us now in the 21st century that this is the history of chemistry, that we don't in fact include everybody that was and has always been there. That is, even though these are the names, people of color, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, women especially, weren't missing. They were in fact there, they just weren't ever given credit for it. One of the things that's really important to highlight in this moment is women in chemistry have existed throughout the entire history of chemistry, but they are now remembered as the secretary of this person who was their husband. Even though there are some women that did really amazing research and should be credited and are starting to get credit now, but they were just known as this person's secretary. And so the point of the talk was, we shouldn't obscure this history because it then removes and decenters the fact that chemistry, like most of STEM, has started off in a place of homogeneity, but it is slowly, in fact, moving towards a place of inclusivity. And acknowledging that history helps us to overcome that history as it stands and acknowledge where some of the things that we have as legacies of this homogeneity come from. So that is the fact that people who apply for grants are more likely to get a grant if they have a white sounding name and if they're male. When they publish papers, the same thing holds true. Women are less likely to be treated appropriately when they seek medical care. People of color are less likely to be given pain medication if they're suffering from pain. These things come from this homogeneous history. And we have to acknowledge that and actually center that in terms of the work of DEI in science. And so I was kind of energized by this talk of, oh, I've been trying to decenter the history of chemistry, but it's important to actually name and acknowledge what that history is and where it's brought us and what the legacies of that are that we actually have to work to overcome. Because if we ignore it, we're not actually doing ourselves any service. Yeah, it's nicer to not have to talk about that, but it's not helpful. And so that then led to something that I call an installation, trying to sound artistic, I guess, but in the hallway in the second floor of labs, there is a poster that just kind of shows the names of people that make it into the chemistry history books. But then to counterbalance that narrative, there are also people who are Black, Latina, Asian, every other ethnicity and racial background other than white, and women and non-binary folks and trans individuals, that you can actually go and read their story and read how they made it through to history, doing chemistry in this history. But that thing that started out as an exhibit on the second floor of labs has now become part of the first part that you read in the first chapter of the book. That is, I would say, the students, the things I've gotten to experience, questions have all kind of slowly led to these various threads coming together. That in January this past year, I was switching back from doing an organic chemistry elective for the advanced chemistry class to doing the traditional Gen Chem elective in the spring. And I was looking at the book I'd been using and I went, oh, I don't like this. Essentially, I came back to where I'd started and realized that I'd changed a lot since I last used that book, and I wasn't okay with going back to that book. Partly also because chemistry books tend to cost a stupid amount of money. I think the last time I made the students buy the book I used to use, it was $312, which also was not something I was comfortable with. And so I used that sense and all these various things to go, okay, I'm going to make a book. And I used the sense that I'm teaching that class. That is, I decided on this in January. The class was live. And I said, okay, I'm going to use this pressure to get this idea from the drawing board to practice. And I was essentially drafting chapters 1 week in advance of my students then using them. And so, as I said, it became a passion project that's spun wildly out of control. But it's become a really fun project because I tell students and have told students, this is a beta version of a book. If you find something and you can help me make this better, I'll put you in the acknowledgement page. You are helping, I'm going to acknowledge your contribution to this work. So if you skim through the file on the acknowledgement page, there's a whole bunch of students who are in that and named as people that have helped make this a better project, a better result. And so it's evolved. This year, I didn't put it in initially, but I've now kind of blended green chemistry. That is, how do we think about chemistry from a sustainability standpoint, which also chemistry is not done very well. Chemistry is a very materially intensive science, and we've not always acknowledged that what we do has consequences in terms of putting lead in our gasoline, or forever chemicals to make everything non-stick, or any number of other examples come to mind. So the book is continuing to evolve, and it's something that I'm using in my classes, which has been really fun to actually have it be a living source of something that I'm helping my students understand chemistry, but they're also helping make this a collaborative authorship, if you will. I think I've run slightly over, and I apologize if I lost the thread at a couple points, but it's been a really fun project and something I'm happy to share with you all.
Thanks, Will. No, it was great. And I got to be happened to be in Will's class, checking it out when he kind of got to announce to students all the work he's been doing to make this textbook available as open access, and to hear their enthusiasm and cheers for him. So I know it's been a passion project for him, but something that's been hugely beneficial to our school as well. Well, you can probably see why it is so cool to work with and learn from these people, really wonderful colleagues. And I think we have a few minutes to kind of open things up for questions. And I think maybe the easiest way to do that, given our size, is if you want to put your question in the chat. And if it's specific for a person, you can kind of name that person, or if it's just a question for the panel, we'll jump in as we can. But we're happy to hear from you and do our best to answer questions.
I can talk faster than I can type. I'm
Oh,
wondering
sure,
if it's
great.
okay if I ask George a
Absolutely. And
question.
if that's easier for you and you want to just chime in, please go ahead. I can't see everybody, so just jump in. Thanks.
Yes. So, question for George on the math curriculum. First of all, thank you so much for focusing on statistics. I'm in STEM. I don't know how many years of schooling I went through, never had a statistics class, lots of calculus. Statistics is so much more valuable to me in what I do today. So, thank you for that. And I was wondering, how do you think about, especially in the statistics curriculum for kids who are not as STEM focused, prioritizing actual calculation versus probabilistic thinking and other conceptual frameworks around statistics?
Okay, thank you for that question. Yeah, so we teach statistics at all the levels. So we have a basic introductory statistics for students who are just going through what we call the regular path, and then we have it in the accelerated path. We have advanced statistics, which is the equivalent of AP statistics. We have calculus-based statistics, which is sort of like the equivalent of mathematical statistics. And then we're having a whole semester of it in the integrated math next semester. And integrated math is specifically for students who have, let's say, math is probably the thing that they don't want to think about the most, or it's not something that they've had necessarily a lot of success with. And so we're thinking very carefully about how we present that. And so we're looking at examples. So we say, okay, what are the things that we think we could apply statistics to that would be really interesting to them? Things that probably new to them. So part of it, one of the focuses that we're going to have is finance. And we'll be talking about the stock market. Because I think that, when you introduce the idea to them, they've heard these terms, and they're sort of, vaguely familiar with them. And then you start talking about, well, these are what some of the indexes are, and these are, and look at this index, and if you look at the Dow Jones index, you just see these, there's this curve sort of gracefully growing, going up. But if you look deep, it's like, well, there have been some very non-graceful moments there. Boom, we've all gone through them, lived through some of them, and we say, okay, well, what can we talk about? Well, let's see that. What do we got there? And so say, well, what sort of numbers are we seeing? And once you start saying, oh, we've got this data set, and how can we quantize this data set? What can we look at? How can we summarize this data set in a way that's meaningful? And then we can start pulling out, oh, well, let's take a look at, let's say the average, let's say, what's the average, let's say, I don't know, the average, let's say, rate of growth, even though it's sort of an exponential growth thing, but let's take a look at average. What sort of averages are we seeing? Or let's say if we were talking about, let's say, a portfolio, what sort of an average are we seeing return on this portfolio? And let's start talking about the spread of this portfolio. So we're introducing statistical notions from the application, because if it's like, well, some years are going to be really good years, some years are not going to be good years. What fraction of the years are going to be good years? What fraction are going to be really bad? How bad are we talking is bad? What does that mean in terms of how much money we make or how much money we lose? And so the whole idea is to find an application that we think is going to be really interesting to them, and then start looking at the statistics from there and start introducing those concepts. Now, did I answer your question fully, or have I missed out some very important part of it?
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I see some things that I feel like I can answer in
Go
the messages,
for it.
so I think I'll go for it. So in terms of classes, most classes are max at 15 kids, and most teachers carry a load, if you're full-time, of 4 sections. So 60 would be what most people have if you're full-time. And then in terms of like what other things do I teach? So I teach US and Middle Eastern history at all the levels. So the classes I teach in US tend to focus on things having to do with urban history, African American history, and planning history, and so like a little engineering in there. And then the progression of history for grades 9 to 10. So At CA, all history is elective, and the program is leveled. And I think this gets to the idea that kids come in with sort of different skill levels, and so there are intro level classes that are open to 9th and 10th grades. Mid-level classes open to 10th and 11th, and upper level classes open to 11 and 12, and kids sort of progress. They're leveled by skill. So regardless of what you're studying at any particular level, there are skills that we as a department have agreed are being taught across the geographical different courses. So at any level, you could be taking a course about any region of the world. So it could be Asian history, it could be African history, it could be North or South American history, it could be European history, in any one of those levels. But the skills that you're going to work on are the same, regardless of what class you're taking. So the levels are about progression of historical skill building. So in 9th and 10th grade, you might have a student who is in intro level in 9th grade and mid-level in 10th grade, or you might have a student who stays in intro level through 10th grade, or maybe part of 10th grade, to keep working on those intro level skills. Did it make sense? I hope so. So yeah. There. Oh, and then the tour guide class is open to upper level. So
Right. I'm going to give a quick mention of the Department X question because it's a great information for that will be our future back to school session that we're going to have in the winter will be around Department X and feature some of our teachers who are working in Department X. The short version is we were working to figure out how we could get teachers from different departments who are normally very separate together in the classroom and teaching. And we shorthand called it Department X as we were conceiving it, and the name stuck. But I think we'll invite you back in the winter, hopefully, to hear more about Department X and how that works. Nick, there was a question about encouraging the appreciation of, or how to write in addition to the appreciation of writing.
Yeah, I could say a little bit about that. I think about those things as entirely intertwined. In class, we write every day. And a lot of what I'm trying to pitch to students is that I think about writing as thinking. And so, for instance, in the work of appreciating what we're reading or thinking through what we're reading, I think writing is an essential part of that. One of the divisions I make for students or distinctions I make about the kinds of writing we do is oftentimes we're in a mode to write to explore or to find an answer to something. And sometimes we're more in a mode to demonstrate our own understanding of a thing. And so much of what we're doing is writing to figure out what we think. And we do that both in class as a way to prep discussion. We do that as a way to discuss things. We're often sort of sharing what we've written about something as a way to process things. And I tend to toggle pretty regularly between like a piece of reading homework and a piece of writing homework, so that this notion of processing our thinking is something that we do via writing that I hope gives us a kind of fluency with it, and then helps us to set up, I hope, like essays that are a lot more vivid, even though their attention might turn toward the more demonstrative. I want to try to show you or communicate with this other mind that I understand this thing. I hope what makes those more exciting processes are that they keep that notion of the exploration afoot for themselves as they write, so that like my hope is that they come to some new understanding after they've written an essay, even though that essay was set out to demonstrate some understanding that they had.
Great, thank you, Nick. I think we have a question from Chris about math data fluency and logic and algorithmic thinking. George, I don't know if you can see that one.
Yes. Let me just make sure I read that one really carefully. Let's see. Well, the let's see, math data fluency, robust logic, and algorithmic thinking. Yes. So like I said, we have a whole wide range of courses, and for students who have a whole wide range of interests in pursuing STEM courses or possibly not. And so we have courses like for instance, at, the highest level, the one that I'm teaching at the moment is linear algebra. And that one, I'm giving them certainly a very specific set of skills that, the standard linear algebra skills. How do you work with, matrices and determinants and eigenvalues and all that sort of stuff. And then we moved into say, okay, those are great skills, but a lot of math is about interpreting things. What do the data tell us? And so we said, okay, why don't we try these little bit more advanced linear algebra topics, such as we're doing primary component analysis and singular value decomposition. And those are a lot about, okay, so we're generating these numbers. What do they mean? And I find it very, very, very important for them, because so often, like even in statistics, it's like, what do these numbers mean? You know how to get them. And that's it's a whole lot of, an algorithm and trying to get them. And so much of math has been about, learning algorithms. But at this point, it's like, okay, let's talk about the meaning of this. And then how do we connect these things? And so we're looking at things that are related to it, like artificial intelligence, and talking about, the artificial neural networks. We're connecting it to real networks in the brain. We spend some time talking about that. Say, oh, what are the similarities? What are the differences? In the advanced statistics class, we talk about how do you go about collecting data so that what you get is meaningful. Because you can collect data, and sometimes you don't realize you just introduce a huge bias just by the way you went around collecting that data. And so we want to make sure that when they're doing things in a way that's going to allow them to pull meaning that will be meaningful. That will make sense. That will be more representative of what they're hoping to study. And then we don't forget about the kids who want to go on to the more abstract stuff. So like I said, we've got the set theory course, we've got the topology course. Those are courses that stretch your mind. I remember when I was in college, there were certain courses that I found extremely helpful: abstract algebra, statistics, topology, set theory. Those were ones that sort of like gave me new ways of thinking, totally new ways of thinking. I always say, yeah, that's great for them too, and they want that. And so they really appreciate it. So I said, great, well, let's go and explore these ideas. So like I said, it's just a whole huge collection of different types of things that we offer, and students have that choice about which way they want to go, depending on what interests them. So I hope that answers your question.
That's great. Thanks, George. It looks like we have time for about 2 questions, and we've got 2 questions left in the chat. So maybe we'll ask Will about the audience for the chemistry book, and Kim can tackle civics, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. But Will, what is the audience for this book?
So for right now, the book is solely being used in its entirety here at CA, but I have been in collaboration and conversation with my former mentor at BU, who teaches the off-sequence general chemistry course. So there's a lot more flexibility in terms of book choice and what he does. And he's using some of the book in part. But I've also been working with Taylor and Francis Publishing to actually get this published as an open access textbook. So it will be completely open access, free in perpetuity textbook, ebook available through Taylor and Francis sometime in May-ish of 2024. So for right now, CA, a smattering of stuff being used at BU in a one-off sort of basis, but eventually open and available to the entire world starting around May.
Cool.
That is very cool. So the question about civics, and also I think Chris was trying to ask also about, like, do we do social sciences? And the answer to that is, like, I would say that there are the skills that you would use to engage in social sciences are learned in the science, math, and history and English departments. That, it's all of those skill bases. Do we have a social science department at CA? No, we do not. The history department is just demonstratively a history department filled with historians. So there's certainly teachers who, like, so Topi teaches more philosophy oriented classes. But I think most of us are historians, but I would argue that the skills that you're learning in math and in science and in English and in history are all things that a good social scientist would need in their toolkit. And so when students get to college, my experience talking to alums is that they are well prepared for poli-sci, psych, sociology, anthropology, and disciplines like that. So I just wanted to make sure, because it seems like Chris was really wanted to ask about social sciences. In terms of civics, it's a great question. And it's kind of baked in. So the way that we as a department thought about, I didn't sort of talk about this, the different levels. So intro level courses are all pre-modern, and mid-level courses are all early modern, and upper level classes skew modern. So kids are forced to take something that's pre-modern, something that's early modern, and something that is modern. And this gives sort of an arc of chronological order to the program, but it also means that every kid is learning something from the early modern period, which is where those Enlightenment ideals go and get spread around the world, sometimes joyfully and sometimes by force. But you're not escaping them no matter where you are in the world. So there's a way in which every student is going to come across and wrestle with Enlightenment philosophy ideas, because that's what's happening in that time period. So there are some courses that deal much more directly with civics, from a perspective of like, let's read the Constitution. So I'm teaching African American history right now. We just finished reading the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. On Friday, we're going to be looking at some Federalist Papers. We're looking at it through the lens of African American history, but they're still reading the whole Constitution and Declaration of Independence. And we're talking about the nature of, the polity that's being created and how to think about those civic ideas and civic engagement. So it is sort of, I don't know, it's sort of like it's a smoothie with the spinach that's all kind of mixed in there, if you want to think about it that way. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about the way we sort of do civics.
Thanks, Kim. And I realized I missed Ms. Gray's question. So Nick, in 1 minute or less, how would you speak to how you teach grammar in your courses?
I would say, so broadly, I haven't diagrammed a sentence with students in probably 15 years, just to be like perfectly clear. And the last time I was made to do that for a grade was in 7th grade. Miss Worcester, I got torched on that test. But today, for instance, like really good example, I think mostly it comes through one-on-one feedback in essays. So I was reading a student paper today about Jesmond Ward's novel, Sing and Buried Sing. And the student, in the sentence they were quoting, changed the pronouns of the narration because it fit their own prose a little bit more easily. And so, but what I thought was really important was the I voice in the thing that they quoted, because they were making an argument about the agency that character had. And so that's like an opportunity to kind of integrate a conversation about grammar and how pronouns work in service of, hey, you can make this argument more clearly, more succinctly, by letting this prose be and changing your own to call attention more carefully to how this constructed sentence serves the idea that you're trying to make about it. Scene. Done.
Scene. Beautiful. Thank you, Nick. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you to my panelists. It was great to hear from you all. We hope you'll come back for future back to school series. As I said, we're going to have one featuring Department X. We're anticipating later in the spring, one where you can hear from some of our students on the senior projects that they've been working on. So please do come back and join us. And thank you again for being with us tonight. And if you're in the area, stop by and visit. We'd love to see you. Take care.